that's a good start. Can everybody hear me? Okay. I'm Bob Lerman with the Urban Institute and American University, and I'm delighted to be here. It's a wonderful event. Thank you for inviting me. I'm going to make a few general comments and then introduce the panel and get them involved in giving us the answers. So I just want to make about 3 or 4 key points. First, manufacturing is obviously coming back in terms of value added, to some extent employment, but the employment levels are still quite low as a share of total employment in the United States. And that's quite different from countries that use a lot of manufacturing jobs for people, such as especially Germany and Switzerland, where the share of employment in manufacturing is double ours in Germany and about 60% higher in Switzerland. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, we say, well, we don't have the skilled people. We aren't training sufficient skilled people. And there's a lot of controversy about this. Why the controversy? Well, Peter Capelli says employers are not spending enough. They're not working hard enough to create the pipeline themselves. Other people look at the same data, like ASTD, say that companies are spending $170 billion per year, way more than a lot of colleges and other venues for training. The federal training establishment, for example, spends maybe 6 to 8 billion, and WIA spends about 5 billion. Jobs Corps about $1 billion. So what is it? Well, this comes to my second point. We don't measure things. As much as we had all those numbers in the first presentation, we have not had a survey of employers to see how much they're spending on training and how that training is going by a systematic major study since 1995. 1995. 1997 we had maybe one additional survey, but we don't even know that. Now, a third aspect of measurement is that companies themselves, when they do accounting, they know how much their physical equipment costs, and that's an asset. They depreciate it, but it's an asset on the balance sheet. But to what extent is human capital counted as an asset on the balance sheet? Well, no. There was this notion of an audit. What is your actual training? What's the workforce, the education levels, and so on. Excuse me. But it's not built into a direct assessment of company performance. So it's not built into company performance, and it's not built into national performance. We don't know, for example, we know how many people have graduated college. We have some idea of how many have graduated high school, although that's controversial. But we don't look at how many people have credentials, occupational credentials, that really are valued in the workforce. We have a vast array of licensing requirements, and we have a vast array of individual things going on in the country, but nothing systemic. Fourth point is we know that, and we've heard it again and again here this morning, that experiential learning, work-based learning toward an objective is probably the most effective way of training large numbers of people, especially in the middle skills area. Probably in the higher skills area as well, but certainly in the middle skills area. And yet, what do? Well, we have the objective of having the highest share of people graduating college. I mean, it's a disconnect between, and how do you get to college? Well, you have to go through the Common Core. You have to have very high standards. In high school, you have to learn the most advanced mathematics just to get into college. And we have people going to college but they're frustrated. A large share drop out, far more than in other countries. So what else have we learned research-wise? Well, we've learned, excuse me, that even in the United States, we do have a modest size apprenticeship system, and the Manufacturing Institute is trying to develop something comparable in terms of standards. And the studies show that it works, at least for the workers. And yet, we have not used that information to change policy. So with that backdrop, let me get into how you guys, in the context of your own businesses, in the context of a very competitive international environment, how do you get the skilled workforce that you need to be internationally competitive? And we'll start, let's say, with GE, and then move on to shipbuilding, and then move all the way across. So how do you do it?
Well, we have several different programs. I think probably the most exciting one was the one that you saw the video of that we've recently launched with the Manufacturing Institute and a coalition to get skills to work. And that program actually has a four-pronged approach, as I think you heard our CEO talk about. And so it has an accelerating skills training program piece, it has a translating military experience piece, empowering employers, and then also hands-on training. So to accelerate the skills training piece, the coalition partners work with local community and technical colleges to establish the Manufacturing Institute's Right Skills Now, accredited curriculum, fast-tracking, industry-recognized skill certifications. So that first class of candidates of veterans that will be enrolled in that program in 2013, and they will, at GE's Aviation Manufacturing Hub in Cincinnati. And then we have additional sites that will roll out across 2013. To translate the military experience, the Manufacturing Institute, again, is working with Futures Incorporated on a digital badging system that will actually translate the applicable military occupational skill codes into advanced manufacturing civilian position speak. And additionally, in that same space, General Electric has partnered with LinkedIn to expand the reach of that system to actually make it accessible to our supply chain partners. So in the empowering employers piece, we've partnered with the Institute for Veterans and Military Families at Syracuse University to develop and deploy a toolkit for employers that's focused on creating meaningful, lasting careers for veterans. And that toolkit will leverage work begun by IVMF with support from JP Morgan Chase and the Robin Hood Foundation. And it takes research from over 40 businesses, best practices, and looks at how they can best support those families. And then in the hands-on training piece, as you may have picked up from the video, so we've partnered with Tech Shop, where we'll have 1,000 partnerships. In fact, one of them will be in Washington, D.C. next year to provide hands-on training, again, in the technical trades.
And does this hands-on training, is any of that where you're actually engaging in production, or you're not just seeing the machine in the abstract, but you're actually contributing to production and maybe even earning something?
Well, the Get Skills to Work campaign is focused on creating that pipeline of talent to be able to come into the job. So where you would actually see the actual production would be the on-the-job training. So when you take the veteran population, for example, some of those folks are going to already have the skills that we need to compete for a job right out of the chute. They'll come out of the military, they'll be fine. They'll be actually able to go right onto the shop floor and begin that pipeline of on-the-job training. The ones who don't have the full, where there is that skill gap, those will filter through the community college and the other pipeline that I described. So there's kind of a dual track depending on the talent that the veteran has in that case. But there is definitely a component that just once, whichever track they go to, once they actually get to General Electric, yes, we do have a very strong initial workforce training program that brings them on where they're actually a part of the production facility.
Okay, and here in Newport News, you're operating something not exactly the same, but you do have a pipeline.
Well, Newport News, we initiated our apprentice school in 1919, so we've been around for a while. The important thing that we found out is we need to have people that understand how to build ships, both in the classroom and on the deck plate. I know one thing that we have found is that the apprentice school is the way we build our leaders. And when you think about the apprentice school, is it just hands-on training or other kinds of stuff? But our people are involved in designing, information technologies. They get to work with logistics, production control, so they get to do a lot of things. Newport News Shipbuilding is like a small city. When you think about the little M and the big M, we have doctors, lawyers, nurses, security people, engineers, craftsmen, you name it, we have it. And I think our group here today, we need to think about the big M, the enterprise excellence that manufacturing brings to the country. When you talk about wages, an apprentice can start at $14. After 4 to 5 years, he's at $24. He can go from there, like I said, up to be anything he wants to be. We do encourage the schools in our community. We found out that our supply chain, we could find the parts and the suppliers, but when you think about the supply chain, the people supply chain is the most important thing we're dealing with. And we recognize the fact if we didn't go get involved in our schools and get them excited and engaged in producing literate, career-ready people, we weren't going to be successful. So we do engage in career pathways. It reaches into the elementary, secondary, junior colleges, and even into the colleges. We want people to want to be in manufacturing because we build an exciting product. Aircraft carriers and submarines are not simple. We can't build them with people that don't have qualities of critical thinking, problem-solving skills, and all that. The other thing is in the last 6 to 4 years, veterans have graduated with honors out of the apprentice school. We also, speaking about veterans,
how does that work? How do the Army people, they come in after the Army and
these are veterans. Any branch of the service, they can apply to the apprentice school. They have to have the prerequisites of algebra, et cetera. We bring them in, and at the end of that 4 to 5 year period, they graduate. Yeah. And the good news is they graduated in the top of the class, which says we want to engage more veterans. The last thing is in 2012, we'll be out to hire 20% of our new hires will be veterans. So.
And in terms of the share of how many people apply relative to how many you can accept, about how many do you accept per year into the school?
We do about 250. The total school is 750 people. We have a waiting list to get in the apprentice school. So I talked to the apprentice director and I said, well, are you getting enough applicants? He says, I'm getting plenty. So it's a desirable thing. The thing we found out from our career pathways manager, now that the kids are being exposed to what we offer in the apprentice school and the pay, they are now looking at that becoming a career.
Okay. So in that case, build something good and they will come. What's been your experience?
Well, I'm with ClickBond. We're different from GE. We're very small. We're only about 325 people, and we're based in Carson City, Nevada. Probably about 3.5 years ago, we sat down and we said, looking into the future, we want to grow. And if we're going to grow, we're going to have to find people to help us make that growth possible. And oh, by the way, we have a bunch of baby boomers who are going to be retiring in the next 5 to 10 years, and we need to replace them. And sitting in Nevada, which many of you probably know is sitting at the top of a lot of bad lists and the bottom of a lot of good lists, we didn't really see the pool of people and talent that we need to pull from. And we want to keep our company making things in America and in Carson City, Nevada. So we realized, well, we're going to have to do something about this. And so I think historically we and other manufacturers in Nevada at least have expressed disappointment with the education system, the fact that a high school diploma does not validate someone's ability to read, write, do math, or problem solve. That was a problem, and we spent a lot of time pointing fingers. And about 3.5 years ago, I think we kind of realized maybe we're the problem, as Jennifer said before. We haven't engaged in the past 2 decades. We've just expected that this system will magically produce the people we need with the skills that we desire, but we don't have to engage, we don't have to show up. And so we've been engaged on a number of levels. I won't go into all the specifics, but basically building partnerships with higher education, workforce development, economic development, K-12 education, to open the doors of our factories, to make sure that students and parents and teachers and counselors and the community at large knows what advanced manufacturing is in 2012. So there's a physically bringing people into the plant element. And then there's the element of perception, which is public relations, marketing, and advertising, and hitting home the message. Think Libby's, Libby's, Libby's on the label, 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 Smokey the Bear, friends don't let friends drive drunk. All those messages and marketing campaigns do affect human behavior. And so through our partnership with Dream It, Do It Nevada and the support of that program, we're really starting to make some progress on changing the perception of what these careers mean. So that's the high-level view from where I sit.
Very good. And Dan Swinney is head of the Chicago Renaissance Council and also is building a high school, or has built a high school in Chicago. But Dan is not directly a manufacturer himself, but he works with a lot of manufacturers. What are you seeing in terms of how they deal with a qualified workforce in this supposed shortage? And then you can go into the question of the image and branding issue, which I know you also want to relate to. Dan.
Yeah, well, actually, yeah, I did want to start with that first issue because I think the way, and I wanted to build on what was being discussed at the last part of the last panel, it is how we dramatically broaden the image of manufacturing. Because I think if we're going to, in fact, solve the multiple problems of manufacturing, we have to go way beyond what we've been doing for the last 10 or 15 years. I mean, typically manufacturing has been presented as a private issue. And we talk about quality of jobs because we really want to attract the talent to come into companies. And that's clearly a problem we have to solve, and we're all here to solve that problem. But then often the agenda of manufacturers goes then to taxes, regulation, and unions. Those are important and complex issues that have to be addressed. But to me, we need to really forcibly, in fact, advance the public self-interest in manufacturing and do that much more aggressively than we have. In other words, it is the only way, and I should use that word intentionally, that we can build a sustainable society. It is the only way that we can overcome issues of poverty. It is the only way we can solve the crisis of the environment. It is one of the best ways to create social capital. And there's a whole series of things that, even if you aren't manufacturing, you're attracted to that image because really, if we're going to have a sustainable society, it's the only way we're going to, it can only be done, and the essential means is through manufacturing. So that's the message we've taken up in Chicago, and it's working, that we're in a situation of beginning to mobilize the entire city around the goals of advanced manufacturing. Mayor Emanuel, who wasn't so keen on manufacturing, now says being a hub for, the leading hub in advanced manufacturing is the number one strategy of the city, and he's investing in public education, in city colleges, and in research and development in manufacturing. So that's the framework, and I think that's where we need to go, and it means that we need to have sort of a much broader array of unlikely partners in this process, including the traditional partners, but also community-based organizations, the environmental movement, and yes, the labor movement. And because if we begin to speak about broad interests, we can have the breadth of coalition that can bring about the changes we need. So just what we do, in Chicago, we created the Chicago Manufacturing Renaissance Council, which is in fact that kind of partnership. It's labor, business, government, community, and educators. And it was in fact inspired by the German model. I mean, in Europe, every major player is at the table to design something as well as to provide a solution. And the first project of the Renaissance Council was to launch a public high school. In other words, we decided we needed to do it ourselves. So we have Austin Polytech Academy. And the first thing we say about Austin Polytech is it's not a trade school or vocational school. It's a school to educate the next generation leaders in all aspects of manufacturing. So it's skilled production positions. We're accredited by NIMS. Last year alone, we had 114 kids secure 176 NIMS credentials. But we also talk about positions in management. We talk about positions in ownership. There's a huge issue of succession of ownership in small firms that has to be addressed by another generation that aspires to take the helm. We talk about positions outside the firm that are part of being a career in manufacturing. We have a relationship with a law school that does a thing on intellectual property rights. A career in manufacturing is being a lawyer doing IP work. In the school, we have 60 companies that are partners for the school, of a very small school, providing internships and the whole range of experiences that happen. And the last thing I'll say is that in the machine shop, a NIMS accredited machine shop, our instructor is a jazz musician, and he has now getting a patent on a new mouthpiece for a trumpet. And we're starting a business that will be partially owned by the students to, in fact, create money, a source of revenue for that school. So let me just stop there.
Fantastic. So to what extent does your work look at, let's say, this combination of work-based learning and school-based learning toward a credential? That's the apprenticeship model, and you use that in Newport News. To what extent do you use it in GE, and how does it benefit your company, and how do you estimate the benefits?
Well, I think, so I'll give you one specific example. We have a very interesting reciprocal program with the U.S. Army Reserve. It's in the healthcare community. So the Army uses a lot of General Electric's magnetic resonance and CT imaging equipment. And we have this reciprocal agreement with the Army where a lot of those reservists that use that equipment in the Army are actually employed at General Electric and train on that equipment. So it's an agreement that works back and forth to provide, one, it provides us with a great deal of benefit from a perspective of understanding the customer that we have, which is a great value. Two, because again of the technical training and leadership and resourcefulness, mission focus of the veterans, it gives us a great employee on the other side that we can really leverage. So that is one example of where we're deriving a great deal of benefit from internship.
How do you know that you're deriving a great deal of benefit? I mean, how does GE measure? Do you have a measurement, or you just talk to your leaders in these companies, or what?
Well, we measure it through market share. We measure it through our ability to create, and that market share is largely driven on new product introduction. So when we actually are able to employ within our company employees who also then use our products out in the real world, and they can come back to us and say, gee, this would be a really neat product if only you could solve this problem. And then we go and tackle and address that. That's a huge benefit. So we're able to capture.
So the innovation occurs, in a sense, at the ground level, at least in terms of thinking about what new things can be done.
Absolutely.
And how can you maybe talk about the innovative character of the learning process at the apprenticeship school, and to what extent innovation takes place among your graduates and workers as they move through the school?
Well, what we're finding is being able to have that apprentice learn the skills he needs in the classroom, and then going to the deck plate or engineering, they start asking some pretty good questions of why are we doing it this way? And as they ask those questions, we're starting to see best practices come up. Why don't we change the way we're doing it? One of the things that we're learning to do is concurrent engineering. Not only do you want to engage the apprentice in this concurrent engineering process, we've got senior designers and we have new engineers come in, and we're starting to look at co-locating the 4 or 5 people we need. So when somebody has a question, will this design work? What are the materials you need? How can we best have a producible process? We're starting to look at these pilots to do that. And the other thing that we're finding is once you engage people in the total process, it's not that I just build it. How do I need to engineer it? How do I need to weld it? Once you get that co-location and that exchange of information, people get pretty motivated, and you'll find you'll become very successful very quickly.
And that I think is the experience when people talk about innovation in some of these other countries with heavy manufacturing, especially Switzerland and Germany, that a lot of innovation is driven by people who are not necessarily the highest paid engineers, but rather people working at the line level who are very skilled at it, and they've gotten a lot of experience, and they ask those questions, and they even often know how to make changes. So how do we promote a culture that emphasizes that type of learning as opposed to what I would call the academic-only approach? Does anybody want to jump in there?
Well, I would say first we have to take ownership of making that clear to the world and communicating that. And you know, one of the things that's come out of this whole discussion, we talk about skills, and I think sometimes when we say skilled workforce, we're not totally clear on what we mean. At least from ClickBond's perspective, I don't need someone who necessarily comes to me with everything in the bag. We're perfectly happy to pay for someone to get National Institute of Metalworking Skills training. We're perfectly happy to pay for someone to go to college and learn engineering skills or whatever. We're happy to pay for someone to go to welding school. What we're not happy to do is provide academic basics, reading, writing, math, and problem solving. And a lot of us will say we can't find skilled people, and that's really what, at least in ClickBond's mind, that's what we mean. We can't find people who are trainable. And you know, if you're not walking in the door with those foundational academic skills, we can't help you, and we can't help ourselves to help you. And that's why, with respect to credentialing, we've moved as a company beyond the high school diploma, which we used to say that's what you need to come in the door, and we've now replaced that, and all of our incoming hires must have the National Career Readiness Certificate, which ACT grants, and that validates in a way that we're comfortable with reading, writing, math, and problem-solving skills. So we know that we're at least getting someone who walks in the door, even as an assembly worker, that can be developed and pushed along any number of paths that he or she is interested in.
So you're saying that the career readiness skills certificate you trust more than a high school diploma?
Absolutely. I mean, high school diplomas vary from community to community, state to state, school to school even, at least in Nevada. And so, yeah, that's something we have a much higher degree of confidence in, and we've actually seen results.
What level of math is expected with the career readiness credential?
Well, I don't know what you mean by what level of math.
Well, let's say, for example, is it being able to do Algebra 1 problems well, or is it needing to do trigonometry and quadratic equations and that sort of thing?
I don't want to be perceived as dodging your question, but it's doing math in an applied fashion, an applied sense, and being able to solve problems, and being able to ask the questions to get to the answer, even if you don't know how to do trigonometry specifically. So it's more of an applied nature, how that test works, and that helps us a lot.
Now, Dan, I think the way I interpret some of your high school is that at the high school level, you get them excited about learning these STEM type skills because of the direct application. Is that a fair?
Yeah, that's right. And building off what Ryan said, I mean, first of all, you know, and especially our school is a public school, it's not a charter school, and I think that's an essential question we need to address, because of the issue of dealing with the workforce needs of manufacturing is the issue of scale. And if we don't transform our education system generally, we aren't going to have the scale we need to solve our problems as manufacturers. In our school, you know, it is a public school, and so Chicago Public high school diploma really doesn't mean that much. So we insist that each student graduate, of course, and meet their basic courses, but they also have at least 2 nationally recognized credentials in metalworking. You know, so we work with NIMS because we're really focused on the metalworking industry. And our students are successful. They get excited about that as they get exposed to that. The other part of the education is not only does every student take Project Lead the Way, and every student takes machining, but every student has, through their high school career, the chance to go, they start as freshmen doing tours of companies and trade shows. By the time they're juniors and old enough to work, they start job shadowing, they start internships, they start summer jobs. So and these are often in small, privately held companies, which means if they have a job shadowing experience, it'll be hanging with the president of the company. It'll be with the top engineer, it won't be in the copying room. So by the time they've graduated, they have credentials, they have exposure to manufacturing in its best way, so then they can make a choice what career they want to pursue. But the other thing I want to say is that we're very closely affiliated with Harvard Graduate School of Education and support their pathways to prosperity. Because in manufacturing, even if you don't go into manufacturing, the contextual education linked to manufacturing is the best way to learn math, for example. So we're an inner city school, and our kids come into the 9th grade with a 3rd grade math level. And so we have true academic challenges if you look at our report card. On the other hand, the rate of learning, the increase in learning in the school in math has placed us in the top 20 schools in the city of Chicago because of contextual education. In other words, kids go to a great math class, they then go to their Project Lead the Way class and their machining class, which is applied mathematics, and then they go to a company where they see that your career is rewarded because you know math. So why wouldn't you do well in math as opposed to seen as an abstract thing? And then finally, just that the school itself is the anchor for development in the community. So we've influenced equally, because we're talking about manufacturing, we're not talking about secondary education only. So we have influence in the secondary, post-secondary education system. And now the big project linked to the school is the starting of an innovation park, research park, with the support of the city of Chicago. By the way, this is all based really on the German model. I went to Dortmund a couple times, and it was inspired by their approach to this, both education and innovation. So in that situation, we have kids who see a whole career in front of them in their community that has to be linked to innovation.
Now, you were saying that you're willing to pay for these training, the type of training and various types of college training even. How do you see the benefit, and how do you measure it?
Well, we have a philosophy at ClickBond that, and some may agree with it or not, we don't care where you choose to get an education or what you choose to study. We don't actually, we pay for anyone who wants to go to school or further his or her education in any subject, we will pay for. We don't care what it is. We don't put stipulations on that because we believe if someone is furthering his or her knowledge, that's making them more able to think and more able to contribute in ways that maybe we haven't thought of. I mean, talk about innovation. We want people studying liberal arts in some senses. We want, of course, people studying engineering. But we're very pro creating thinkers and then cultivating, that melting pot in a sense to further our goals as a business. So, that's how we see it.
But do you, for example, like if in the prior session, the point was, what's the mix of workers that you have by education, by age, and all of that, and what will you need? Do you do a formal assessment, or you're just? Well,
I'll give you a tangible example. We rely a lot on machining, and we even today have a need for qualified machine operators who have potential to develop.
Get some from Dan.
Yeah, if they want to move to Carson City, that's part of the problem. But
probably
we love it, but not everybody does. But we need machine operators who can be developed into journeyman level machinists over the next 5 years. Yeah. And so we were able to bring folks in through a program and a partnership with local community college. It was the focus of the 60 Minutes piece, where basically folks were screened with that National Career Readiness Certificate so they can do the basics. They were then put through a fast-track NIMS program, and several of them were veterans actually, and we were then able to hire them. And someone asked, well, what was the benefit? For us to develop that person on our own would have probably taken a year or two, and we were able to, in 16 weeks, in partnership with all the assets in our community, take someone from food stamps to a full-time job with benefits, who has potential and can develop into that journeyman level machinist. To me, that's a tangible benefit for us.
And then you spend money to get them onto the
Sure,
journeyman.
we keep investing in that, and then building in an apprenticeship model manner, for sure.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting pieces of research is that in most there, and this is very rigorous research about the Swiss apprenticeship system with companies, that companies seem to be able to recoup the benefits, recoup their investment in the apprenticeship program within the apprenticeship period itself, because the people, there's a lot of investment in the first year and in the second year, where there's more outflow than gain, but by late in the second year and the third and fourth years, there's more gain than cost. And so the studies indicate that employers, even during the apprenticeship period itself, are able to recoup their investments. So why do you think we don't have more of it outside your companies? Let's start with GE. You know a lot of companies. Why don't they engage, maybe not in a registered apprenticeship, but something that has the attributes of combining work-based, school-based learning, production, toward a credential? Why don't more companies do it?
I really don't have really any insights, a really good answer for that. I think there's a lot of opportunity to improve in that area. But again, I think individual companies need to look at their individual models, like we talked about before. We're engaged now and forever will be in a global economy. And we have to drive innovation to be competitive in that market. We have to be able to create and invest in innovation, create and invest in our talent pools, create new business models. So it's a combination of all of those things, and whether or not the apprenticeship fits in those business models, that I'm sure is what they're basing their decision on. So for some companies, the apprenticeships will work. Other companies, that they will find that they are more than able to bring their talent directly in off the street. And
do you think most companies are really well versed in what these kinds of programs are, either apprenticeship programs or programs that link directly with community colleges, or are they well versed in what the skill outcomes are of various programs, including apprenticeship?
I think they absolutely are. At least the ones that want to stay in business for any period of time are. Your human capital is really the greatest source. Like we were talking about before, it doesn't show on the ledger sheet, but your human capital is absolutely the greatest asset that a company has. And companies, large and small, invest a great deal in developing that talent. So we constantly we have internal training and education programs, and we look for best practices, and we participate through our GE Foundation at practicing different education models to see what works. So we're constantly on the cutting edge, I would say, of looking at different models that support our labor force. So I would argue that any company that seeks to be a business, a sustaining business for 130 years or so, probably is doing the same thing.
Now, Newport News, you've invested in a whole university, in a sense. A 4-year school, 750 students. That must cost a lot of money. How do the top executives see that decision?
Well, a lot of them came for the apprentice school, so they probably say, I want more of this to happen. Interestingly enough, our apprentice school, we're putting in a brand new campus. It's going to be a 4-year operation versus 2. So we're really committed to it. And the other problem we have, the demographics, we are losing thousands of shipbuilders pending to retirement. So we got to bring in the kind of skills we need. The leadership level cannot be replenished without that apprentice school environment that we have. The other thing, to answer your question, I think the community colleges need to really model an apprentice school. They're doing some of it, but to say even expand it, we're large enough we can do it, but my supply chain guys.
How could they expand it? What do you think in terms of what they would be doing? How would they work differently if they expanded it?
I think they would get agreement with these other companies. Hey, your guy's going to come for 6 months, do the school, he's going to come back and forth. So I think
a lot more work-based learning. Basically.
Exactly. And the thing is, too, I need to share that kind of learning with my suppliers. They need to be able to get the same qualified talent that I need, because I can't build ships without parts, and I can't build ships without good people. So the schools are one, my supply base is the other. The stuff the guys have presented as far as this credentialing is excellent. So I think we're getting on to something here.
What about other companies in your community? What do you see them doing?
I think your question is really, really important. Why aren't more manufacturers singing this tune? And as one of those companies that maybe wasn't as heavily engaged maybe even 5 years ago, I can tell you most manufacturers who are of the small and medium-sized type, who employ the most people, okay, across the country, put their heads in a hole and want to make their parts, be left alone, and not create any ruffles. They're not particularly social animals. We make things, okay? I'll say it.
Yes, it.
That said, because we haven't been social with our friends in education or workforce, we've now found ourselves in a pretty big hole. And we've realized, okay, we've got to engage. So the reason people aren't engaged, I think, is because a lot of the programs, at least from where I sit, that are trying to do good things, whether they're from the workforce system or the education system, all fall under the umbrella for the guy who has his head in a hole of government and public funding, and those people, I don't want to be on their radar. So the way out of that is for the industry champions, small and large, across the country, to convince their colleagues. You know, for ClickBond to go to, you know, the metal shops up the street, to GE down in wherever, to you know, the aerospace team up the street, to say to them, look, folks, we got to work together. And they are much more likely to listen to the CEO of ClickBond coming to talk to them about that than the higher ed system or an education person or a workforce development person. So we have to own the communications with ourselves as well.
And how did you get, Dan, how did you get some manufacturer buy-in? How did that happen where they did collaborate? They were small and medium-sized firms, and I know, because my brothers are one and members of NAM, that, you know, they're concerned about sales, they're concerned about costs, they're concerned about competition, and, you know, they hope that the workforce thing will, you know, the person hiring people will hire good people and train them. And yet you got them to take responsibility in the community and be part of a larger entity.
Well, it came from our understanding, first of all, in the first instance, it was the Renaissance Council, a manufacturing Renaissance Council that proposed a school. So we knew that if their education was going to be effective, it had to be at a very high standard to meet the needs of even entry-level employees going into these companies. So we said the school had to be premised on high quality, high standards, and that's why we said NIMS, or nationally recognized credentials, whether it's NIMS or AWS or SME, was what the school had to be based on, as well as a high school diploma. And so, and in fact, our first discussion was with Arnie Duncan, because he was CEO of Chicago Public Schools, and he said, why do we need credentials? Our CPS diploma is enough. And we had the same discussion with the Chancellor of City Colleges, and we simply said we won't do the school unless we can teach this standard. The second thing, though, the second part, and so and we proved our case. We fought it out, we fought with the public school system, and our school has been premised on a high standard. And therefore, employers know we can hire your graduates because they meet our standards. The second challenge, though, goes to the other part of your question, is now we're doing that. We're generating students who, within range, I mean, it's a complex project, but we have an educational model that is employer standard driven. We now have students graduating and are going into employment in companies. Then we have a totally uneven experience of their experience in companies, because some companies have a good system, tuition reimbursement. All the companies do tuition reimbursement. But in terms of providing supervision, ongoing classes, ongoing education, mentorship, companies are totally across the map. And we're now saying to companies, we can't fulfill our side in public education unless you have a more formal commitment to an educational process that continues in the firm that we can depend on. Because if we have a kid going through all this work in high school, having credentials, and then being stuck someplace with somebody who doesn't know how to supervise, then we lose our credibility. So that's why I've been advocating. I think what we need is what is called, and the Renaissance Council believes in, a 2+2+A system, an educational path, which is 2 years in high school with dual enrollment in a community college program, with triple enrollment in a formal apprenticeship program by employers. And then you begin to have a system. And it's really based on best international practice. This is not our idea. This is what normally happens in Europe all the time. But we need that kind of system so everybody has confidence it's going to work.
Can I build on that?
Yeah,
Just,
please.
the way I would define what you're describing is the employers, manufacturers have to provide the pull. Okay, and the way that we provide the pull is by doing the perception stuff of making manufacturing look better, opening our factories up, doing training, mentorships, and all that. But one of the most effective ways we can provide a pull is by saying, in the future, for the jobs that we need to fill, our common language with education becomes attaching those skill sets to credentials. Credentials, they may ask, why do you need them? But they become that common bridge between academic world and our world. And when you can say, if a person comes out with this credential, I will hire him or her, they can justify moving resources, whether federal, state, or any other, to actually create something that's going to serve your needs. Without credentials, you're all over the map and there's no standard. So, I mean, your guys' work is incredible.
But I think the other part of it, and what Jennifer said earlier, part of the problem is us, because if we don't, on the employer side, have the equivalent standard that can be enforced and spoken about and held accountable for it, everything begins to fall apart. I think the issue of apprenticeship, I think employers are scared about apprenticeship just like they were skill standards. Because they first of all say, just give me a warm body, we don't need skill standards. Now I think there's an aversion that we need to take on in a manufacturing community, that people perceive apprenticeship as a union thing or a European thing or something that imposes something on them. And we need to clarify that, argue it out. We need to be part of a global system that is competitive, and we need to meet the standards.
Yeah, I will say.
I could jump in with a Twitter question, actually.
Oh, please, go ahead.
Paraphrase here, but the question's about, and we've heard a lot about the young people pathway here. And GE and the Get Skills to Work is a little more about an alternative pathway for adults already. Is that open? You talked about military. Is that open to people that are looking at manufacturing as a career that maybe are either have been out of the military for a while or not vets at all? And how does that serve that population?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, our initial focus, as I said before, is on veterans. And again, when we look at the veteran population, there will be several 100,000 veterans that will be leaving the service between now and 2015. Those veterans, as I said, come with a bunch of technical training, leadership skills, mission focus, work ethic, a lot of great things that make them great fits, for a manufacturing company. So that is a starting point and where we'll begin to leverage, but I'm very confident that we will open it up to a broader audience probably in the next 2 years or so.
Okay, we'll go to a question since you're patiently standing there.
Thank you. I actually have, it's kind of a combination of questions and suggestions, but first I would just like to say that if anybody's looking for an intern, my son is majoring in mechanical engineering. Will be available this summer. So moving on from there. I've heard a lot of great individual programs by companies today. Is there a system-wide effort to establish apprenticeships with, some structure, organization? I mean, if you look at, this is just kind of an off-the-wall example, but, U.S. News and World Report every year puts out its best colleges. What about best apprenticeships? So that you are kind of comparing programs across the board and you're making it achievement-based, and kids then, vie to go to the best apprenticeship schools. And then the other comment was, I think this is national, but where I live, the Small Business Association has a program called SCORE, where they match, retirees to startups and so forth. Is there something like that, or can there be something like that for all these manufacturing, management, and really skilled people that are moving out of the workforce to help, train those that are needed in the workforce?
Well, I'd like to address the first part of your question. We actually have 3 apprenticeship systems in the United States. In a sense, systems. They're not real systems. One is a real system. The registered apprenticeship system, overseen by the Department of Labor. There are about 400,000 apprentices at any point in time right now, which is not a 0%, but it's small relative to other countries with robust systems. We have unregistered apprenticeship programs. So we have a lot of programs that have the elements of apprenticeship, even credentials, but are not registered with the Department of Labor. When I talked about data gaps before, that is a huge data gap. We do not know how many there are. There was only one survey that kind of tried to capture it in a certain way. It was a relatively small survey. If we were to take that survey seriously, there'd probably be double the number of apprentices as registered apprentices. In other words, maybe 1 million in the unregistered system. But I don't know whether I can take that survey seriously because we don't pay much attention to it. If we look at what the government is doing in marketing and technical assistance and creating these standards that can be portable, the federal government, the Office of Apprenticeship, the budget for the Office of Apprenticeship is $25 million. They have lost 2/3 of their full-time employees. I had an intern look at what states are doing. Almost no state is increasing their investment. And in most places there's a decrease. What that means is in Ohio there's one person in the state. In Indiana there are 2. To help market, to help work with companies to put these programs together. So we really do lack a systemic effort. 25 million, by the way, compare that to just the WIA system, which is maybe 4 billion, and they don't have they don't even have 400,000 in very serious kinds of training that the apprenticeship system has. So when Jane Oates comes here, you can ask her why she hasn't put forward, put more money. She knows that I ask this question.
Yeah, every time.
Provided a trickle of funding. And just to talk about the impact, in South Carolina where they did put out a bit more funding, they've had tremendous success. They went from about 500 to about 5,000 apprentices in a fairly short period, creating a whole new program per week, which is why I'm a little skeptical. I mean, if all these companies knew everything about it and they could just do it themselves. But here they do need a little bit of help. But I'll turn to the apprenticeship expert.
Well, we're not going to talk about apprenticeship anymore right now.
Oh, okay.
But we're going to deal with that bigger problem of making manufacturing a desired career path. And we have a lot of good organizations like the Association of Manufacturing Excellence, Society of Manufacturing Engineers, what we're doing with the Manufacturing Institute. We're trying to say, how can we bring all these resources and energy together so we can have this one super highway of getting people to look at these career pathways. And so I think there's a need for what you said. I think there's some beginning things to happen. I think this conference is going to be one of the things that will lead to that as a recommendation. I yield back the balance of my time.
Okay. Your second question was about the retirees, and I don't know whether any of you wanted to talk about that.
You're being...
I'm sorry, Annette.
Oh, okay.
Get your question, and then I'm going to have to close us down because we got the big technology one coming.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'm Matt Meyer of the North Carolina Community College System, and part of what I do is work with our 58 colleges to ensure they're meeting the needs of their local industry. And my questions are going to kind of surround that. It's really for Ryan and Chip. There's 4 issues that impact our colleges in being able to meet the needs of local industry to produce enough of the skilled workforce. And listen closely to these 4 issues, and we've talked about them. One is career readiness. Math is like the graveyard for lost ambitions. It wipes out a lot of our students. Second issue is pipeline, recruiting a diverse pipeline. Between 80 and 90% of the students in career and technical education in North Carolina are white males, and we have a serious crisis there. Third is our instructor pool. They're also mostly all white men. We have very few women and hardly any minorities that are teaching. And the other issue relative to instruction is being able to afford the best. And lastly is capacity. If we had the students, then we run into, most of our colleges are 5 to 10 years behind industry as far as technology. We've got colleges in Western North Carolina that have machining equipment from the USS North Carolina, a World War II battleship. So those 4 issues, Chip and Ryan and whoever, if a community college came to you and said, I need help with just one of these, they're all great, you can help with all four, but just one of them, which one would you pick and why?
Community colleges have come to us and asked those questions. What I can tell you is there are opportunities for industry to help outfit facilities and provide resources that way. If you construct your strategy the right way and are meeting a need that creates jobs at the end point, you can actually channel through your workforce system WIA dollars and other things to help outfit facilities. That's what we've done in Nevada. As far as the diversity, it's a huge issue. What we've seen is if you can develop sophisticated marketing, advertising, public relations efforts, which means you have to hire an agency and pay for it, most of the time dollars in 501c3 type dollars, foundation money, all that, you can't use it for that kind of stuff. So industry has to fund that, but if you can fund good communications, effective ones, you can change that perception and create an interest. You know, it's just so there's, I know you got to go, but.
Did you want to say something also about the diversity angle?
No.
I think we would be interested in helping in all four areas. If you asked me to pick the one that's the most important, I would think that that would be the capacity issue. We really want to work with the local college. This is a local issue. The local schools are going to be able to best help out that local manufacturing facility. And the tools and the equipment and the skill set that's needed in those facilities differ depending on what type of products they produce. So I think that would be an area that would be of greatest value. However, I would also tell you that through expanding your instructor pool and being able to recruit a diverse student population, businesses, I think you'd find businesses would be very open to also helping in that area. We have a very large affinity network at General Electric. I happen to lead the veterans group, but we have African American forum, an Asian Pacific forum, Hispanic forum, women's network, several different affinity groups that do this on an ongoing basis, go out and recruit and entice younger students to look and open their eyes into careers at General Electric and in manufacturing in general.
Dan, you wanted to say something.
To me, on the issue of diversity is critical, and that's where having a public agenda around manufacturing as well as a private agenda is critical. So, I mean, when I speak about Austin, Austin is a poor African-American community on the west side of Chicago. So 100% of our interns are African-American, 100% of our credentials are held by African-Americans, 54% of the students are girls, so on and so forth. And last 2 weeks ago, Mayor Emanuel, because it's been driven by the Renaissance Council, which has a broad private-public partnership, committed $1.25 million to the high school, to outreach to elementary schools, to similar programs for adults, and to an innovation center in the African American community, because there's a recognition that diversity and innovation is what's going to give our nation a competitive advantage in the global economy.
Well, thank you very much. I first want to apologize for not giving formal introductions, but I know that you've all passed the career readiness credential and are able to read who is on the panel and what their credentials are. So thank you again, and thank you to the Manufacturing Institute.
Very sensitive when we call a room like this together and overwhelmed by the commitment that we all have to overcoming these challenges. And this panel here represents real jobs today. And what we see is they are engaged. And Dan, I heard you speak to kind of two themes, sort of, we need tools for companies, we need to be better in what we do, and we need tools for schools. And as a selfish plug to the Institute, you know, our strategy is to serve as the national resource for manufacturers on the attraction, qualification, and development of world-class talent, whether it's from the pipeline, whether it's transitioning veterans, or whether it is our efforts to celebrate the contributions that women in manufacturing make through our STEP initiative. So we are here, and this is a great representation of the efforts that are going on around this country. So I'm going to close us out for lunch, and we actually have a buffet lunch in the room right next to us. If you want to bring it back in here, they will have someone that clears tables. We actually didn't make it a working lunch for once. We want to give you the opportunity to network. Annette, I'm sorry I missed your question, so let's connect and see if we can't bring it up to one of the other panels. And to our virtual participants, we will roll with the introductory video at 12:50 for our international panel, and I will recognize up front that our international panel will start to bring in the monitors and our virtual participants. So lunch next door, and thank you again for this fabulous session.